we are here to do a little work that is going to help our students to deliver in exams. I'm going to focus on biology for now, and we are going to look at those important points you need to prepare for your exams. And then biology, we all know, is very simple, very easy. We're going to look at some introductory topics from one topic to another. I want to start from the characteristics of living things. Characteristics of living things. Now, characteristics of living things, we oftentimes use the acronym Mr. NIGER ACD. Mr. NIGER ACD is the acronym we use. Our M, I am going to specifically state the meaning of these letters as we are going to look at them one after the other. M represents movement. R represents respiration. N represents nutrition. I represents irritability, otherwise called sensitivity. G represents growth. E represents excretion. R represents reproduction. A represents adaptation. C represents competition. And of course, D represents threat. So, looking at this, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 very good characteristics of living things. M for movement, R for respiration, N for nutrition, I for irritability or sensitivity, G for growth, E for excretion, R for reproduction, A for adaptation, C for competition, and of course Z for death. So we start with the first one, movement. Now, we know that movement has to do with a change in position of everything, living or non-living things. But we have to restrict ourselves to living things because biology is the study of plants and animals. That means the study of living things. Now, living things are expected to move from one place to another in search of either mates, food, shelter, and even comfort. Okay? So movement is important to every living thing because every living thing needs food, search for food. Every living thing needs mates. Every living thing needs shelter. Every living thing needs security and, of course, comfort. So we say that movement is a change in position of a living thing. Now we are considering plants and animal. We already know that plants are fixed. So if you are looking at plants, we said that plants do not move from one place to another. But at the same time, plants show what we call growth movements. In biology, we call that tropism. Tropism, the growth movement that is shown by plants in response to external stimulus such as the sun, such as the water. So plants could respond to those stimulus in the environment. But basically, plants cannot move, like moving from here to maybe the roundabout or moving from here to maybe another state is not possible. But be that as it may, even when plants cannot move from one place to another, plants can still feed, plant can still seek for comfort, plant can still compete with one another. Excuse me. Now, if you're looking at two groups of living things, the unicellular organisms and the multicellular organisms. Unicellular organisms are those organisms that are made up of a single cell, while multicellular organisms are those ones that are made up of multiple cells, more than one cell. For instance, humans, as we are multicellular organisms. Plants are multicellular. Most vertebrates are multicellular, but unicellular organisms, example, the protozoans that we all know, the euglena, the amoeba, and the paramecium, even plasmodium. These are all protozoans and are unicellular organisms. Now, if you're talking about movement in organisms, And we mentioned unicellular organisms who will be making use of what we call locomotory organelles. Now, the word organelles and the word organs are different. We oftentimes use organelles when we are referring to unicellular organisms because unicellular organisms are microscopic, they cannot be seen with the naked eye. And of course, we are using organelles for that. Organelles are those structures they use in movement but cannot be seen with the naked eye. For instance, we can talk about euglena using flagella for movement. Euglena cannot be seen with the naked eye, and of course, this locomotory organelle can also not be seen with the naked eye. So, euglena uses flagella for movement. Amoeba uses pseudopodia that we all know, pseudopodia for movement. Paramecium uses cilia for movement. Of course, Plasmodium does not have any known locomotory organelle. But if you are referring to multicellular organisms, we oftentimes make use of the word organs, like the fins, used for swimming, like the wings, used for flying, like the limbs, used for walking, and so on. All these are organs. So we've been able to differentiate between organelles and organs. Organelles are for unicellular organisms, organs are for multicellular organisms. That's number one difference. Number two difference is that organelles are microscopic, cannot be seen with the naked eye, while organs are macroscopic. They can be seen with the naked eye. I can see my hands, I can see my legs, I can see the wings of birds, I can see the fins of fishes. All those are macroscopic organs that are used by organisms to move from one place to another. Now, you've been able to establish those facts. Now, I want to draw our attention to the sponges. The sponges. Those organisms that belong to phylum. We are going straight into classification after this topic. Phylum porifera. Phylum porifera. These are all aquatic organisms. The aquatic organisms, they live in water, that's what I mean. And so that we have other groups of organisms that are being classified into different phyla and classes based on their similarities and differences. Sponges also have some similarities that made us classify them into this particular group, porifera. Now, very striking feature of organisms belonging to this particular phylum is that they are sessile. Remember at the beginning of this class, I said that animals can move from one place to another, but plants cannot. So these are groups of animals, though they are animals, but they are fixed. They are aquatic, but they are fixed in the ocean or any water body. They cannot move. Now, all the organisms that though naturally they are supposed to move, but they cannot move from one place to another, are known as sessile organisms. A clear example is the sponges, they live in water. Now the question now is, if they are animals and they live in water, they cannot move from one place to another, how do they feed? How do they feed? We all know that water has current. It's what we call water current. As water flows, excuse me, it's possible that it packs alongside some diatoms, phytoplanktons, and zooplanktons along the water. The water is flowing, it carries those organisms around. And for instance, we have the porifera that could look like this, something like this, and let's say this is a water body. Now, on the surface of these organisms, we have tiny pores. Tiny pores, P-O-R-E-S. Tiny pores that surrounds the system or the body of the organism. We have a very large pore at the tip here. Now, these other tiny pores at the body of the organisms are called the ostia. Singular is ostium, and then plural is ostia. Then we have this other very large pore known as osculum. Now, these are two different pores that surrounds the system of this particular organism. Now, as the water is flowing, the water packs these diatoms, the phytoplanktons, the zooplanktons alongside, and the water passes into the organism itself. And within the organism, there are some structures that will be able to trap whatever particle moved along the water body here. So that when the water moves away from the organism, it's only the water that is moving out. Other particles that came alongside the water are being trapped within the canal system of the organism. Now, take note I use the word canal system and not digestive system because these are still very primitive. in the evolutionary trend. And then we have, if the water is actually moving up here, and then leaving the particles, the diatoms, the phytoplanktons that came along with water, and they're being trapped here. This is when the organism itself will be able to digest whatever particle that came in here, and of course, use that as food, and will be feeding just like that. So we say that naturally, plants do not move from one place to another. Animals can move. Set of organisms, animals that cannot move are called sessile organisms. Example, the sponges belonging to phylum porifera. And we also differentiated between unicellular and multicellular organisms in terms of what they use in movement. But in unicellular organisms, they use what we call the locomotory organelles, while the multicellular organisms use locomotory organs. And I've given example of unicellular organisms such as the protozoans, Euglena viridis, Amoeba prutis, Paramecium quadratum, and of course, the malaria parasite Plasmodium falciparum. And I've given an example of multicellular organisms such as all the plants you have around us and most of the humans we have. Thank you. And then we move straight to the next one, respiration. Now, respiration is the most important characteristic of every living thing. Respiration is the most important characteristic of every living thing. Now, sometimes this question is being asked, Jam may ask, we just list the characteristics of living things, just give you like few of them, then ask you which of them is the most important characteristics of living thing. Now, it's very easy, very simple. Now, let's consider the fact that humans can fast. Can stay 1 day, 2 days, 3 days without eating. So nutrition cannot kill you. If you are not eating, you may not die in 2 days, 3 days. So people go and fast for like 40 days. It's still okay with them. And of course, movement, you can decide just to stay one place. People are in the hospital, they're hospitalized, they're there for like weeks, months. Okay, they have not passed out. And we look at, if you are looking at response to stimulus like the irritability, we are looking at a situation where something can, or somebody can just respond to stimulus. Oftentimes we hear people say in the hospital and they say they are in coma, they are not responding to any treatment or anything, but that doesn't mean that they have passed out. So people can stay for like days without responding to anything around them. And then we have growth. Of course, growth is important, but not very important compared to respiration. We have excretion, we have reproduction, and so on. The respiration is such that you cannot stay for like, I don't know if somebody can stay for like 30 minutes without inhaling air, without exhaling air. You cannot stay for like 15 minutes. You cannot stay for like 1 hour without breathing in and breathing out. Even if you practice breathing exercise, of course, it's going to be a process, but naturally, you cannot just stay without breathing, without taking in air and sending out air. Can you stay for like 24 hours without breathing? Can you stay for like 2 days, 3 days without breathing? It's not important. It's not that possible. That's why we are looking at respiration as the most important characteristic of every living thing. Ants respire, plants respire, animals respire, birds, fishes, they all respire. Now, for the fact that humans cannot stay in water and, of course, respire is because we are not using the structures that will make us adapt to the water environment. People will not really understand that even fishes in water, they breathe. But the question is there oxygen in water? Of course, if we are talking about oxygen now, we have the oxygen that we breathe, that is the terrestrial oxygen in the environment, in the terrestrial habitats, that is very, we are adapted to it because we have lungs and when we respire. Fishes in water, though there is oxygen in water, those fishes will not have to use terrestrial oxygen, fishes will have to use diffused oxygen. That means there is oxygen in water. So all aquatic life will have to respire even while they are in water. Just like you bring fishes out from water and place them on the land, it's difficult for them to survive because their gills are not well adapted to the terrestrial oxygen. Humans, if we go into water and we don't have oxygen with us, it makes it very difficult for us to breathe in water because though there is oxygen in water, but our lungs are not well adapted to the oxygen in water. That is diffuse oxygen. Now, what is respiration? We can define respiration as the oxidation of food materials to give us energy. In a very simple term, the oxidation of material, complex material in the system to give us energy. Don't forget that air is a mixture of gases, and in all the gases that makes up the air, we have oxygen giving us just 21%. excuse me. So we have 21% of oxygen making up the entire airway that we breathe. First, we have up to 78% or 78.1% of nitrogen, and this happens to be the greatest percentage compared to other gases that makes up the air. So when we breathe in 21% of oxygen, we breathe in 78% of nitrogen. We also breathe in other gases that are pollutants such as the sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, carbon monoxide, and what have you. Breathing those gases alongside the oxygen that we take into the system. But it is very important to note that none of these gases will be beneficial to humans, apart from the oxygen. None of these gases will be beneficial to humans. We have just oxygen that is beneficial to humans. So imagine each time we inhale, we are taking out 21% of oxygen in the entire atmosphere. You multiply that by the number of humans we have on Earth, the number of animals, goats, sheep, and all those things, plants that we have on Earth, you can see that we are actually extracting a great percentage of oxygen from the environment. And now the question is, if we take out 21% of oxygen from the air, how many percent do we send back when we exhale into the environment? Now we take out 21%, as we inhale 21% of oxygen, but we send out just 16% of oxygen into the atmosphere. So every one cycle of respiration, we have to short 5% of oxygen in the entire universe. We multiply that by the number of living things that do inhale and exhale, we see why life is threatening to the environment. Now, if we take in 21% and we send out 60%, where is this 5% going to? This is the concept of respiration. Remember, I had said that respiration is what? Oxidation of food materials to generate energy. Now, this food material that has been oxidized, from the word oxidation, actually means reacting with oxygen. Anytime you add oxygen to a compound, that is oxidation. Anytime you remove oxygen, that is reduction in your pre-knowledge of chemistry. So if I have to write the equation that shows respiration, we would say that something like C6H12O6 plus 6O2 giving us 6CO2 plus 6H2O, and of course energy at the end of the day. So if we have to oxidize 1 mole of glucose, this is glucose, 1 mole of glucose, it will take just 6 moles of oxygen to do that, and that will give us 6 moles of CO2 and of course 6 moles of water with the release of what? Energy. Now, when 1 mole of glucose is oxidized, we have a total of 2,880 kilojoules of energy that is generated. If we have to convert this to ATP, we'll have about 38 ATP. So if I'm writing an equation that shows respiration, I have to include that 38 ATP is generated per mole of glucose that is oxidized. This is the percentage of oxygen that has been lost going into the system to oxidize the food material to generate the energy. Now, what is ATP? When we talk about energy generation and energy storage in the system, we do not fail to mention these 2 times, ADP and ATP. Excuse me, ADP actually means adenosine diphosphate. That means you add just 2 phosphate molecules, so adenosine. And then ATP means adenosine triphosphate. Now, why ATP or adenosine triphosphate is known as the energy currency of the cell is because humans, systems, living things do store energy and they also use energy. For instance, we eat now, and it is not expected that we use all the energy, all the chemical energy that is derived from the food immediately. We have to use some part of the energy. We have to store some part of the energy. So in the system, energy is stored in form of ADP, but used in form of ATP. So questions could be like, energy in the system is stored in form of A, ADP, B, ATP, and so on. So we have to be able to differentiate between the two, that when it is stored in form of ADP, and when it is used, just one phosphate needs to be added to ADP to give us ATP. So if you have AMP, which is adenosine monophosphate, and I have to add one phosphate here, I'll have adenosine diphosphate. That means two phosphate molecules. If I add another phosphate molecule to ADP, I will have ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So bringing AMP, ADP, and ATP side by side, it is ATP that is going to generate a greater calorie of energy to the system. These ones have energy, they cannot generate as much as ATP. So if energy is to be stored in the system, we store energy in form of ADP, we use energy in form of ATP. Now that takes us to two types of respiration. The two types of respiration that we all know is the direct respiration and the indirect respiration. Now, what is direct respiration? Excuse me, let us take our mind back to the protozoans, the unicellular organisms. We understand that amoeba does not have lungs, Euglena does not have lungs, the paramecium does not have gills, they don't have lungs. Even when they're aquatic organisms, and of course they are microscopic, they don't have those structures. So how do they respire? Very simple. Very simple. There's what we call diffusion in science. What is diffusion? Diffusion is actually the movement of either movement of substances from a region where those substances are in higher concentration to the region where those substances were in lower excuse me, concentration until a dynamic equilibrium is reached. Okay, so when these organisms are in water and they have to respire, because they don't have these special organs or organelles that help them to respire, there will be diffusion of gases through the body surface. So if we are looking at this protozoa, we say that they respire through simple diffusion of gases between the water and the surface of the organism. So oxygen will have to diffuse in, CO2 will have to diffuse out through the cell membrane. So that is direct respiration, a type of respiration that does not require any organ to act as intermediate in the respiration process, but just that the oxygen or the gases will have to diffuse in and of course diffuse out of the organism. That is direct respiration. But if you are looking at the indirect respiration, we are looking at a type of respiration that I undergo, a type of respiration that you undergo, a type of respiration that every human plant around us undergo, which means that we need structures such as the lungs, we need structures such as the gills, we need structures that will aid in the respiration process. So it's a very clear-cut difference between direct respiration and indirect respiration. Direct respiration does not require any organ or organelles. It's just by simple diffusion of gases, while indirect respiration actually require those organelles. Now, if we still have to go deeply into the indirect respiration, that is what we have what we call aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. Just as the name implies, aerobic respiration is this type of respiration that takes place in the presence of oxygen. That means oxygen is involved in that type of respiration, such as the one I wrote on the board. This equation is a general equation that shows how respiration takes place in the system. The product, these are the reactants, and of course, these are the products of the respiration process. And this is aerobic respiration because oxygen is involved in the process. Now, this is carried out by myself, this is carried out by every other human being, plants, and animals around. But if we are looking at the anaerobic respiration, we're actually looking at a type of respiration that does not require oxygen, though it takes place. All right. Now, specifically, we could also say that that can be called fermentation, either alcoholic fermentation or lactic acid fermentation, where the glucose that is here will be broken down in the absence of oxygen to yield alcohol at the end of the day. Oftentimes we hear that yeast, you have fresh palm wine, you bring it down, and as soon as it's brought down from up there, you taste the palm wine, it's sugary, you can drink as much as you want, it's not intoxicating, because the yeast that are present naturally in the palm wine have not been able to convert the glucose that is present actively to alcohol immediately. Though they are present and the conversion process is still ongoing, but it's not enough to convert everything to alcohol. The same palm wine, you've taken 2 glasses, 3 glasses, 5 glasses now at a particular sitting and it's not intoxicating. If you keep it for after 24 hours and you still have to take such palm wine again, 2, 3, 4 glasses, you may become intoxicated because at that point in time, the yeast present has been able to ferment the glucose, to ferment the carbohydrate into alcohol. And that happened in the absence of oxygen. That is what we call alcoholic fermentation. And of course, if it is lactic acid fermentation, oftentimes you see somebody will just be running, somebody is just running, and then immediately you stop running. Let's say that you went on a sprint, maybe 100 meters competition, immediately you stop running, you notice that you're going to breathe heavily. You breathe heavily as if the oxygen around is not enough for you. Breathe heavily. It will take time before you normalize. Why is that happening? Now, analysis had shown that when you were running, your system needed more energy so that you can complete the race. But at the same time, your nostrils have not enlarged. Your mouth has not enlarged. And you need more oxygen to oxidize more of the complex material in the system to generate more energy for you. That is why as you are running, it is practically difficult for you to close your mouth if you are going on a sprint. Why are you opening your mouth to run? Is because you need more oxygen to oxidize the food in the system to give you more energy. And whatever you have to do, the oxygen taken in cannot be enough. That is why the glucose that was stored in the system will need to be oxidized. The glucose that was stored in the system was actually converted to glycogen and stored under the muscles and of course in the liver. Now the system needs more energy and will not have to wait for the glucose that is available. We'll have to do what? Convert the glycogen and then give you energy. How would that be done? This is already stored on the system. So when we get to a topic called enzymology, we are going to look at some enzymes that will help us on some hormones that are there and will help us to convert from one food material in the system to another, like converting from glucose to glycogen by insulin, converting from glycogen to glucose by glucagon, and so on. Now, when this happens, and then we already know that the lactic acid that is built up in the system is dangerous and very toxic, and it's very toxic in the system. So when it happens like that, it's not supposed to be built in the system. It needs to be oxidized. So because you have actually been able, the system has actually been able to convert some things, all right? To convert the lactic acid back into water, back into CO2. That is actually why you are panting. Something has happened. And the glycogen that was stored in the system, okay, was converted to lactic acid, and now from lactic acid back to the inorganic materials so that everything will be normalized. So we have two groups or two classes of anaerobic respiration. I have mentioned the alcoholic fermentation by yeast, alcoholic fermentation by yeast, and we also have lactic acid fermentation. It is very important to know that these two types of respiration happens in the absence of oxygen. That is why they are grouped as what anaerobic respiration. Okay, we are going to take respiration and respiratory system as a topic on its own, where we are going to look at how oxygen travels down from the windpipe down to the lungs and how the diffusion actually takes place in the alveoli and so on. That's a very broad topic on its own.